So this is one of those ways, is having that constant touch, the context of your business in their environment. Then we have some rather very basic examples of some branding, but again, we'll look at your website, your logo, anything else you'd like us to reference. We've had people submit photographs of landscapes, cityscapes, nightscapes, really anything you'd like. We can put some effects on that. Really, the limit is what you'd like to do. If you have your own designers, if you're designing yourself, we can certainly help you in understanding the different aspects of the branding, so then we'll work with you on that. But with our branding, there's over 100 points of branding in our PC Client software. So again, this isn't just a simple plug-and-play solution. This really is a serious rebranding of the software service and making sure that this does look and feel like your business. I'm going to jump into what we typically see in the market. And most of you are going to be familiar with this because you're here now interested about how to make some money with an online backup service. Most of the time, I'm going to start with consumer and small office, home office. But just across the board, the biggest point of security failure is at the user level. It's the user that is the biggest point of risk when it comes to any system. So consumers often don't have any type of backup solution because they're users. So consumers, small home offices who often operate like consumers, they don't have a backup solution. Or maybe the backup solution they do have is rather incomplete. It's not being properly managed. Something that's manually done. So people who are familiar with, oh, I copy my files to this drive, at the end of every month. Well, that's fine, but now you're leaving yourself up to a month of exposure. That's a significant difference. Or who's not properly managing the drive, or maybe the external hard drive you're using is old itself and needs to be replaced. A lot of different things here. But there aren't a lot of consumers out there who are responsible and diligent enough to have a system that's not automated to do it for them. Small, medium business the same way, and also enterprise. Oftentimes in small, medium business, there's some server-centric strategy in place, meaning there's a server in-house. Maybe all the user profiles for your users are on the server as well. But maybe not all users are actually on site all the time. So they're still creating data outside of the network off of the server. And there becomes somewhat of a, well, that data either is expendable, or it's up to the user to make sure that you're syncing on a regular basis, or backing up yourself. And really, that's not a great solution. There's actually some statistics that you can look up that some storage companies have come out with recently that have shown that with the increase in mobile computing, that still about 2/3 of a business's data resides on an individual's workstation, whether that's a laptop or a tower. But that means that it's not residing on the server, which is generally the only place where there's a backup solution being managed and monitored properly, or not, or improperly for that matter. But we still see large holes in security when it comes to the user-level strategy and backup. So the enterprise is the same way. The enterprise oftentimes will be a much more robust backup strategy, but it's still server-centric. How do you handle those laptop fleets? How do you handle people who are working off-site, your satellite offices? How do you enforce a different backup strategy to a different set of IT people who work, for the most part, independently? All IT leaders, the CIOs, they want to make sure that they're doing things that they're comfortable with, that they know and are familiar with. So creating a company-wide strategy, especially if they're satellite offices, is very difficult to enforce, and also very difficult to have transparency into, to make sure that what is being enforced is actually working and being managed. So there's huge opportunity in SMB, enterprise. Small home office and consumer, again, are a little more difficult because they all operate on more of a price point. And there's always going to be someone who's a little cheaper. But again, talk with our partner specialists, and they'll figure out a way for you to be able to work this out with them. Oftentimes, again, consumers, you're bundling things in. Are there many people here who have retail shops? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so actually a pretty small percentage given all the people here. Well, with retail shops, think about, you deal with consumers in that sense, of course. Think about when people come in for virus removal. What's the first step that you do? You back up their machine. So what you can do is you can bundle in an online backup account, maybe even with an external hard drive as a backup, and you back up all their data to this account. You give them that account, and maybe part of the service of virus removal includes getting an online backup account of all their data. That's good for the first 2 months, and then they start paying for it, or 6 months, or maybe you even include the cost of the first year. Really, it's your prerogative how you want to operate that way. It's a difference in philosophy, and really what kind of customer base you have. Maybe you offer all the above, and you give a discount on whether or not they're going to commit for a year, a month, whatever it is. But this is a service that really is the lowest common denominator in what people need to have in place. Again, the biggest gaps in security when it comes to data security is at the user level, which means a user level backup strategy is something that's typically not employed, or at least not administered. So that's a great way to be able to package that in there. Again, we're going to go more into the partner program a little bit later, but we do include support training, all the services. There's no difference in the infrastructure that your customers are sitting on versus ours. It's all top-rated tier centers, state-of-the-art hardware. We don't cheap out on hardware like a lot of the consumer services do. And then, of course, the geographic redundancy is always employed. Here's some more stats on the declining tape market. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think everyone is aware that tape systems are simply legacy systems these days. They take a lot of time and management. They're very expensive. And even though it's sold that you can just replace the tapes for a couple $100, it never works out because you have to buy the latest tapes, and that requires buying the latest drives. So every few years, you're buying a whole new tape system. So every few years, you're spending another $4,000 to $6,000. That doesn't include replacing tapes and migrating tapes from a library of archives. So if you have an entire office store or back room just full of tapes, you need to make sure you have drives that can read all those tapes. So that's also a very time-consuming situation. Also, you got to make sure that it's not just your office manager managing tape systems, because often what we find, what I've found, both personally and through our customers, is that oftentimes when it comes to tape systems, because the process of purchasing such a system was so time-consuming and so expensive, that the owners are often reluctant to even look at anything else unless they really have to. And there's often not any proper management of it. So rather than doing any type of test recovery or even understanding that the red light means bad, you go through and all of a sudden you realize this tape system's 10 years old and it hasn't run a backup in 6 years. So that's a very common situation that you run into. We all know that this is something that's really not going to last much longer. Everyone's moving to the cloud. The cloud's the biggest thing. We have to make sure that what you're going through when it comes to backup is secure. So a good question here: how much redundancy do you have, and how is the data secured? Thanks, Tom. Great question. So security is a big thing. When we start processing data, the first thing we do is we encrypt your data at 256-bit AES on the local machine. We transfer the data at 128-bit SSL, and then we store the data at an additional 1024-bit AES once it's at the first data center, and then we replicate to a completely geographically separate second data center. All of our data centers are Tier 3 and 4 rated. It's a 99.9% uptime guarantee. Multiple power stations, 18 different lines of internet connection, Gigabit networks, very fast. So it's a very nice system. Another good question from Michael. Thank you. How bandwidth intensive is your product? It really depends on how bandwidth intensive your backup set is. Of course, the initial backup, or with any cloud service, the first time you get something up there is you're going to need some bandwidth. With our system, we employ a delta level backup system, or it's a block level incremental system. So the block level incremental system means that we actually dive into the files that have changed, and just as there's units of measurement in all things, so many cups in a pint, pints in a quart, quarts in a gallon, there's so many bits in a byte, bytes in a block, blocks in a file. So if we've backed up a file once before, we never back up the entire file again. What we do is we just get the changed blocks within that file, encrypt, compress, and then we reattach it in the back end. So that way you still have that full independent version available. Another comparison, just to move on, that sparked a lot of questions about how we do backups. So I'm going to save most of that for the end of the session. We'll get back to those questions. Good questions, everyone. Hardware backup versus online backup. A big objection when you go to customers as well. I want a recurring service. Everyone's trying to cut costs. But really, recurring services, just as you see with managed service packages, a recurring service can actually be more cost effective. If you're spending an average of $10,000 per year on a break-fix IT service, maybe your managed service package ends up being a total of $8,000 per year, and you have less downtime. So spending $10,000 on break-fix IT means something broke before you spent the money to get it fixed. That means downtime. That's expensive. You got to roll that cost into it. If you're spending even the same amount, or maybe even a little bit more, on a good managed service plan, but you avoid downtime altogether, that's a much more cost-effective service. So it's a matter of how you run your managed service packages, how you document them, and what you're including in those. So we could talk more about that as well. So again, hardware versus online. There should be local backup strategies in place. Local backup is